experimentation. There's nothing wrong at all with any country experimenting in a small way to see how a thing goes. That's how we learn. But at Turlock in County Wicklow, the ESB have one. They say it gives 290 megawatts, and it gives it for 6 hours. So what it means is, if you had that relation to wind, you'd need a lot of turbines to pump it up, because the resistance of the water go through the pipes uses a lot more energy than you get back down. But be that as it may, what it would do, it would mean that if you had 2 hours good wind and you filled your reservoir, you would then get a few hours of generation and you'd let that water go. But the fallacy is that water won't last forever. Once the thing once the reservoir is emptied, you will have no power till the wind blows again. So if that happened, let's say this year, all over Christmas, we had hard frost here, temperatures down to -16. It's very strong anticyclone and calm conditions. You would have no power at all during those periods. This is a fallacy. So this thing about storage, the volume is the problem with storage. You'd need vast volume. So again, as you say, that's correct.
Okay. Another thing I want to, at the end of the day, after all the technical aspects is worked out, what really is important is what's known as the capacity credit, and that is the amount of fossil fuel generation that you can retire due to the amount of wind that you can produce, thereby cutting down on carbon emissions and whatnot. Now, I see here that the German power companies, after they had all their calculations done in theory, and after they had some years to actually look at the figures in practice, they came out with, at the end of the day, the capacity credit was a figure of 8%, and then claimed to have brought it down to 4%. So the Germans are saying that even after all this investment and the money spent, that the net saving in emissions and retiring of the fossil fuel power plants or nuclear, if they have, but if that's the case, is down at 4%. Is that the figure we're looking at the end of the day?
Yes, Declan. If nothing else was taken from this, and if my way of putting it across have been a bit technical for some people who might be just get a bit hard on that, this is absolutely the most vital thing, because what we're hearing is that the windmills give whatever comes out of them, and they give this, that, and the other. What really matters is capacity credit, and capacity credit is a very simple definition. It's the amount of conventional generation that can be shut down and replaced by wind without making the system less reliable. It's called firm capacity in the US, but the principle is the same. So it really means how much can you turn off of the conventional plant. And seeing that windmills are put up for the one reason only, admittedly at a bit of extra cost, to reduce the amount of emissions we are putting into the air, surely capacity credit is vital. Now, the reason capacity credit is so low, and as you rightly say, the figures in Germany and Denmark are given at 8%, reducing to about 4%. The reason it's so low is, if you put yourself, say you and I were running the grid here in Ireland tonight, and there's a good football match on the television, and there's a good bit of wind, and forecast is for good wind, what can we turn off? If we turn off some of our generation plant, and the wind blows into a gale and the windmills stop, we have a blackout. So it all depends on how important it is to keep your power going. And in this country, it's quite important. You must also remember, too, that the generating plant falls into three main headings, though not exactly. Some of it is very heavy plant. It's like a big locomotive steam engine. It takes 8 hours to get it started up, to get the water boiling, get the coal going, and get everything going, and then to get it into phase and ramp it up into line with everything else. That can take up to 8 hours. A nuclear power station can take a day. So that's slow starting plant. It's very efficient. Once you get it going, keep it going, and it produces very low emissions compared with the fuel you're burning. Whereas the middle time plant, or the mid merit plant would be slower. It would be gas cycle and that, and it'd be quicker to start up. So if we take it, slow plant would maybe take 8 hours and a little more to start up. Middle plant would take 4 hours and maybe another 15 minutes to get it into phase. And then there's quick plant, like a diesel engine is the classic example. And it would start up immediately and could be very ramped up and into phase quite quickly, maybe in 15 minutes or so. Some hydropower can be let go immediately. You just let go of the water and you have power. But the point is that the slower the plant is in starting up, the more fuel efficient it is, and the quicker it is to start up, the least fuel efficient if it's used in thermal. So the point there is that if you shut down some of this plant, you cannot start it up again for a long time. And therefore, what happens in reality is it's kept running. And because of that, the amount of plant you can close down and replace it by wind over a given period of, say, a year is very small. It's remarkably small. But what's even more controversial is that very often you'll see when people challenge the measuring of wind energy at load factor, that's the amount of power coming from the windmill over a year, and the wind people say, all right, we agree with that. They'll then go to capacity credit and they'll say, all right, well, we're saving maybe 7% or 6% or 8%. That's still very good. But you must remember that the credit capacity is a percentage of the actual plant you're referring to. It's whatever that plant is. It can be for any type of plant. But in the case of wind, it's actually a percentage of the wind element only. And so if it's 8% in Germany, and Germany is something like 1/5, if wind is about 1/5 in that country, then it's 1/5 of 8%. And or if it's a different proportion. So if, for example, wind was half of the system, which it couldn't be, but if it was half of the system and the credit capacity was 8%, then the actual saving on fossil fuel would be 4%, half of that. And this is a very, very important point that seems to be missed over. And the reports that are available from Enon in Germany and various others make that quite clear. You're only talking about the wind proportions. And all my figures come on time and time again, including EirGrid's own report for peak periods for 10 years, all show that the amount of actual saving on conventional plants, in other words, on CO2 emissions and other pollutants, is about 1.6% at levels of about 19% penetration, between about 10 and 19%. It might actually be a little more here in Ireland because the penetration isn't too high. When you have only a few windmills, we can't measure it. Nobody knows really whether you're turning off or on plant because it's so small, it's insignificant. It's only as it gets bigger and bigger that the problem arises. And I am putting forward the theory that if you go to something like 33 or 4% wind, the difficulty in turning off plant and the difficulty in balancing that wind on the grid could mean that you'd need more oil and more gas and more fossil fuel burnt and more hydro and nuclear than you would with a system with no wind at all. When that was put to our Minister, Eamon Ryan, on the RT programme recently, on the 15th of December, it was I think it was primetime programme, he said no, that wasn't the case. But many when he was pushed on that, he said, well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll export this power to other countries, presumably Britain, and they'll take the extra power. And he was countered by another professor on it who said the only way you'll export power to Britain is if you subsidize it so high that they cannot merely refuse it. And that is exactly what's happening in other countries at the moment. They're selling off the power at a loss.
Okay, so before we go on to that, the more you look into this, the more absurd it begins to talk. If they strive to achieve a figure of 40%, as you said, that will mean a wind energy load of about 3,000 megawatts. So that would mean that they'll have to build extra fossil fuel to compensate for this and to facilitate it. So we could end up with a total capacity of something like 13,000 megawatts, when today our maximum peak has been shown to be about 4,000. So as you say, it'll have to be exported if at all possible, but you're saying that it cannot be exported whatsoever. So let's just take a small break once again. We're coming up to a break here, and we'll discuss this a bit more in depth. Thank you. Okay, that's an interesting point. So if we have excess capacity, you say that they will be trying to sell it to Britain. But now, is Britain not already in the same boat? Will they not have excess capacity too? And is there going to be a market for this? Well, as we could say, it's going to be about 7,000 megawatts of electricity.
Yes, Britain seems to have the same euphoria as it was described as Ireland for wind turbines at the moment, despite quite a strong lobby trying to point out this, because Britain has a good deal, like Ireland, of universities doing exact sciences, and there are many there trying to point it out. And I'm not alone in all this. And the Irish Academy of Engineers here in Ireland have also made the same assertion. So why would England buy of us if England has twice the area with the best wind speeds that we have? I can't understand that. They say they can. Are they going to export it to Denmark? They're already saturated. Are they going to export it to Germany? They're saturated. In fact, if you go on to the Bloomberg website there, you will see, if you go into Vestas cut forecast, that the Vestas, the big company making turbines in Denmark, are experiencing difficulty selling their turbines into Germany and Denmark. So the market appears to be reaching saturation point. I'm not too sure about the situation in the United States. So this begs the question, what are we going to do with all this power? If we have 4,000 megawatts of power, which is what 40% entails, and if we have 9,000 megawatts of conventional capacity here, and the power is usually during the day is about 3 to 3.5 megawatts, that means all this capacity is going to lie idle, and most of these windmills are going to lie idle. And this brings forward another point, that windmills, despite the fact they're not producing, are always spinning. And I am inclined to come to the point, to the view, that they're consuming vast amounts of grid power in order to keep the blades from freezing in the winter and to keep them from warping in the summer and to keep the gear train warm and the lubrication system warm. We don't know what this is. I wrote to the Minister for Energy here and asked him to give me some information on this, and he wrote back, acknowledged my letter. I got no reply. I've now made an application under the regulations which enable any European citizen to get this information. I posted it off the other day. We'll see what happens. But the question goes back, what are we to do with all this capacity, which is going to cost us a desperate amount of money? And we have a situation here now where we have a climate change bill going through. And incidentally, may I say, I'm not judging climate change debate one way or the other. I'm saying that whether there's climate change or there isn't, wind is not going to do anything to solve it. But we have a representative from the Greenpeace, the Friends of the Earth, telling farmers here that this climate change bill, which is going to restrict fuel in Ireland over the next in a few years, that they needn't worry because there's going to be a huge saving in electricity generation here in Ireland, and therefore there'll be plenty of fuel to give the farmers. What I'm saying is there'll be no saving of fuel at all from wind, and the farmers will be cut and business will be cut and we won't get our fuel. It's going to be diverted. And these windmills, 4,000 windmills, are definitely going to consume a very, very large amount of energy for the 76% of the time that they're giving no power. So this is the ludicrous position about it. What's going to happen to all this capacity? And what is the sense in Ireland, a country which exports a lot of goods, food, and very great pharmaceuticals and electrical things and many things, and we have a good export market. We're a small, open economy. We're now moving into a period of energy exportation, according to some of our government officials and commentators. Now, they are putting it forward that we should be exporting energy because we will have a surplus of green energy. And I'm making the point, which is quite simple, that we will have to import more coal, more oil, and more gas in order to use this energy, and we may not get a customer. And therefore, Mrs. Brown in 22 Main Street, Kingsford, will be paying double and 3 times the electricity bill she would if we had no energy, just to supply a lady or a man or a couple in Birmingham with cheap fuel. I mean, this is a ridiculous proposition by anyone's stretch of the imagination. I understand at the moment, I had a friend inquire in Denmark, that the power in Denmark is 26 cents a euro. 26 cents a unit. It was 13.24 here on my bill a few months ago. It's now 14.1. It's going steadily up. Now, they tell us on one hand this is going to save money, on the other hand, they start putting up our bills. They say, invest enough in wind, and we will be okay. There's 2 major companies here in Ireland involved in this. One is electricity and the other is Culture. That's the Irish Forestry Board. And they have plans to install major wind in this country. It's very, very high. In fact, they would be raising a lot of the wind capacity that we're now being taught about. And their business model is not to produce put up the turbines and sell the electricity. Their business model, and it's reported in several papers, and I've read it, and that is to sell on the wind farms as soon as they're constructed, presumably to people who pay your pension and mine or whatever investment funds there are, and banks and etc. And my question is, what do they know that we don't? Why won't they put up the wind turbines and sell the power themselves? And a very good example of this is the London Array.